Good morning. Welcome to episode 115. We did it, folks. It is finally draft day in 2025. The first round begins in under 12 hours, about 11 hours from right now. Mia, O'Brien, and I are here to break down everything that we've listened to, heard, researched, reported about the Jaguars in this first round. They hold the fifth overall pick. Mia, happy to have you back. You can catch Mia on her show each weekday afternoon from noon to 2 p.m. on Helmets and Heels on 92.5 FM and 1010 XL. Mia, welcome back. Let's do it. I'm excited.
We made it. That's all I gotta say, Gus. I think that after months of maybe not so much speculation, but at least analysis on our part, and a 72 hours, quite unlike anything I think we've seen in Duval County in recent memory, in terms of Jacksonville literally being the quote unquote needle to the NFL draft that will move it one way or another. And the fact that I have literally been on national programs who have reached out because Jacksonville is where the draft begins, and I'm not referring to them picking at number one overall. It's a very different position to be in. And shout out to James Gladstone, the ultimate master of puppets, because man, oh man, has it been a last 3 days or so.
Absolutely. It feels like for pretty much the entire draft process, going back to pretty much the Super Bowl and the winter season, Mason Graham from Michigan was being mocked very consistently to the Jaguars, and even as much as 2 weeks ago. But then there were some rumors and reports coming out that the Jaguars are not really interested in Mason Graham and more so interested in a handful of other prospects. So we'll get to Graham and those prospects in a little bit. But yeah, as you said, like it's impressive how it's been so under the radar for the Jaguars, and it's been a pretty quiet draft process for Mason Graham too, interestingly. And so now at this point, it almost feels like even if we don't know exactly who the Jaguars are going to take, it does feel like they're not going to take Mason Graham, bar a trade back. And so maybe let's start with him. Where are you? Is that where you're thinking, Mia, where Mason Graham is pretty much out of the equation at fifth overall for the Jaguars, but maybe he re-enters the conversation if they're able to trade back from the fifth pick?
I just can't help but go to this, Gus. The fact that you have so many talking heads this week, it's as if this massive revelation occurred, saying nationally, well, Liam Cohen's an offensive coach, and so obviously he wants an offensive guy and a skill player, and they want to build this thing around Trevor. Doesn't that sound almost like too easy of a cop-out?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're just trying to get ahead of it. Even with Ted McMillan specifically, it's like, oh, Trevor always loved those big-bodied receivers. It's like I feel like you're just kind of getting ahead of the pick to try to explain it away. But are those really true reasons to be taking a certain player with the fifth overall pick? I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah, and maybe Tet's the best place to start, because I also want to go through chronologically here. And again, I have no intel on the strategy of setting smoke screens, but what I can tell you is this. At the beginning of April, the if it's not Mason Graham scenario that was presented was Jalen Walker, the outside linebacker from Georgia, who we'll get to here in just a second as well. And that was perhaps maybe the Jaguars go in that direction. Then for the last 2 weeks, it's been Ashton Genty. And then this past Monday morning, I wake up, I'm in the shower, I get out of the shower, I look at my phone at 7:58, whatever time it was, and legitimately there's 3 different national outlets saying, well, maybe it's Ted McMillan. That is strategy to me. That is smokescreen. And in turn, it makes me wonder, well, yes, I do believe the Jaguars have had interest in all 5, 6 of the players that I have written down on my notebook right now as potential first round picks for the Jaguars. I can't help but come away from looking at that order and say, was this planned? And then you throw in the Kelvin Banks equation of it all, which I should note, and I noted this on Helmets and Heels yesterday, and I'll note it here as well. Kelvin Banks and Ted McMillan are both Athletes First clients, which, yes, they are represented by one David Mulligetta, one of the best in the game, certainly, but also one of the best at making sure his clients are taken care of and that their name is in the national conscious. And so you throw all those things together to say, could Mason Graham still be the pick at the end of the day? I believe the answer is yes. The fact that I keep hearing this, the response, when I've asked people, not just in Jacksonville, but around the league, the response is, well. And here's the thing, Gus. When you hear that, the instinctive reaction is, oh, that means that they're lukewarm on him. But I don't go that way. I go, you're not elaborating on him but you're being effusive in your praise for others. And that for me is a question mark. Now I say that, and I've also had some folks with some other teams who've, and we've talked about this on Duval Rundown, the argument of, well, Mason Graham's not a big person and we want big people. The Jaguars want big people in our organization. Like, and I respect that argument as well. But ultimately for me, and that's why I wanted to start, and that's where I think Ted McMillan is a good example in your point about Trevor has played with these bigger bodied receivers like Justin Ross and T. Higgins. Doesn't all of that sound like an easy excuse? It also could be easy reasoning. It could be a valid argument as well. And I'm here for that as well. But at the same time, as I lay it all out to you, doesn't it also read like strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best thing about the process for the Jaguars is just like the lack of leaks. I feel like there was not even any necessarily noise of like the Jaguars loving Mason Graham. I think that there was just no noise coming out of Jacksonville throughout the whole offseason in Mason Graham because he was a consensus top 4 or 5 player on the board, because defensive tackle and defensive line as a whole is a big need, arguably the biggest need for the Jaguars, especially after not spending any of their 10, 11 free agent additions on defensive line. Then like everyone just kind of like made an assumption, and it was a fair assumption, but like it was just that, and it was an assumption that Mason Graham, as the best player available and a player who would best fit the Jaguars' need, makes a ton of sense for the Jaguars at 5. And so I think that basically what happened is that whether it was Schefter or a couple of different people, all of a sudden they said, not so fast, as Schefter specifically said.
Literally said Lee Corso. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's just a part of draft season, I guess. And so now I feel like there's still like nothing actual coming out of Jacksonville. And it's like people are just continuing to make assumptions. They're like, okay, well, if they don't want Mason Graham, and assuming that Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter are off the board, there's not really a ton of defensive prospects that might be worth a 5th overall pick. And especially when you consider they have a franchise quarterback and a first-time offensive coach in tow, it does make sense to look at offense. But like, it's just like a logical assumption, basically. I don't think that any of it is based off of stuff coming out of the Jaguars organization. So again, hat tip to them for the smoke screens that they've caused, especially if it does cause a team to be able to trade up to them for the 5th overall pick to take Ashton Genty. But even if not, they're just clearly going about their business the right way.
Let's pull up Dell's comments with regards to Dane Brugler of The Athletic and his report last night that the Patriots could be a team that, as a trade, if a team tries to come up to the Patriots to try to take to swap picks with the Patriots to try to take Ashton Genty. Got you, Dell. I also want to hit that because, and then we'll go to the next comment from Dell because it also bears fruit. Dane Brugler was on Hacker After Dark with our colleague Ryan Green, the hacker, of course, who, by the way, will be a part of tonight's legendary, first of its kind Duval Rundown live watch party. You guys are going to want to be having a double screen with the NFL draft on one and our coverage on the other, because we're going to be everywhere across all of the coverage of your Jacksonville Jaguars in the NFL draft, and Hacker and Gus will be a massive part of that. Dane was on with Hacker earlier this week, and when Hack rightfully kind of pressed him on like, okay, but what are you hearing from Jacksonville? And this is with all due respect to Dane Brugler, who I respect. Dane's response was, well, this is what I'm hearing from other teams who are speculating and guessing what the Jaguars might do. So now we bring up Dell's second comment, which is that the belief around the league is that no one knows what James Gladstone and John Spytek, a first-year GM out in the desert with the Las Vegas Raiders, what they are going to do. And so again, and this is no knock on Dane Brugler, because I know that all the other insiders and draft analysts around the country are doing the same thing. Because there is no one in the building that you necessarily have this long-standing relationship with, no one is actually talking to anyone in Jacksonville or Las Vegas right now. They are talking to the other 30 teams who have connections to those buildings, but are speculating on what might actually occur. And so that is another really important point that I want to hit on today, because when you hear, well, maybe, that's what it is. It's maybe.
That's right. It is all speculation. So again, only about 11 hours to go until we finally do reach the first round. But yeah, do you speculate that Ashton Genty, I guess, should be the next name that we bring up, would be the pick for the Jaguars if it's kind of like a chalk first 4 picks, where we got Cam Ward going to the Titans at 1, Travis Hunter to the Browns at 2, Abdul Carter to the Giants at 3, and then Will Campbell to the Patriots at 4. And so basically, I guess my question is, if there's no trades in the first 5 picks of the NFL draft, is Ashton Genty a Jaguar in your speculative opinion?
Yeah, I mean, you could make an argument, and that's why I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 names written down on the notebook right now. So I have
Yep.
6 names written down. And I will read you those 6 names, and I will get to the Ashton Genty point, I promise, because I know there's a lot of you that are still mad at me, and you want to hear me verbally say Ashton Genty could be the pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He could. The 6 names that I have written down are Ashton Genty, Tet McMillan, Kelvin Banks, the offensive lineman, we'll call him, out of Texas, Mason Graham, who I believe could still very much be in the running, and this could all just be one giant smokescreen just to get back to the Michigan defensive tackle. Jalen Walker, the outside linebacker, inside linebacker, Swiss Army knife out of Georgia, and Travis Hunter. So maybe we need to start there, Gus. Do you buy, before we get to Genty, because do you buy this idea? I believe, and from what my understanding is, James Gladstone made calls to Cleveland. I think he's made calls to all 31 other teams because that's what good GMs do.
Yeah.
The fact that this is popping up now, and Todd McShay of his, the McShay podcast on the Ringer now, he was asked about it yesterday, and he said it's kind of weird that this is coming out this week, that there was no interest with anyone trying to trade up to the number 2 overall pick, but now there is. And so I'm curious your take on if this is simply Gladstone made a call and then wants to put the smoke out there that he's active, or if this actually has legs and you would be okay as a resident of Jacksonville, Florida, with the Jaguars potentially parting with future first-round capital in order to get a player who, yes, would potentially fill 2 positions of need.
I think it does have legs. I think there's certainly been like plenty of reports out there, like not even necessarily specifically the Jaguars, but just like, like the Browns and the Giants are fielding calls to trade back. There's certain teams that are in the top 10 that are just infatuated with Travis Hunter as a prospect. And then when you look at the Jaguars specifically, I was asking you yesterday actually to try to find this quote. And so I found it thanks to Justin Lewis of the Times-Union, but James Gladstone at the NFL Combine in a clip that was shared by Jaguars social media said that as a leadership unit, when bold opportunities arise, they won't flinch. And so like, obviously you don't want to like just take one phrase and one quote and say, all right, Travis Hunter, welcome to Jacksonville. But like, I do think that like that quote does represent their approach where like, yeah, like they're in year 1 of a soft rebuild, even if they do have Trevor Lawrence and a few other really good players. Like, I don't think they're necessarily going to be trying to compete for a Super Bowl right away. You think about how they didn't they're the only team that didn't re-sign any of its pending free agents during free agency this offseason. They have the most cap space in the NFL right now for their active roster, so they could sign as many as 21 undrafted free agents in addition to the 10 projected draft picks that they have. And Gladstone also said the Combine that like they'll be hunting up more at-bats in terms of trying to get more draft capital and just take more swings to the plate. And so there's certainly plenty of signs that you could point to say like the Jaguars are going to be not too aggressive or at least not too early. But I mean, when we're talking about Travis Hunter as like, at least in my opinion, I'm sure a lot of other people's opinions, like the clear-cut number 1 prospect in this class, and like what would be the clear-cut number 1 prospect in pretty much every single class, especially if you don't include quarterbacks in that thought. Yeah, this is like a guy that just is not only like a number 1 type prospect, but like just something the NFL hasn't seen before. Like he could be the Shani Otani of the NFL in that he's not just a superstar, but a superstar on two phases of the game, on offense and defense, which obviously maximizes his value and his value to the team. And so I think that, again, generally speaking, the Jaguars are going to be a little bit more conservative than they are aggressive in year 1 of the regime, but they're not going to flinch. I think that they're certainly making calls to Cleveland, and it's not just, oh, yeah, we're making calls to Cleveland because like we're making calls to all 31 teams. I think they are making calls to Cleveland with a true want to move up to the 2nd overall pick. Will it happen? I don't know. I really wanted to come on.
What would you give up? What would you be willing to part with?
I would give up 5th overall, 2022 first rounder, and a 2022. Okay, 5th overall, a 2026 first rounder, and a 2026 second or third rounder. And so that would give Cleveland a lot of draft capital in 2026. And so for this season, like, even though Myles Garrett, I'm sure a lot of people on that team like want to try to pursue championships right now, I think they could take a little bit of a gap year and say, Kirk Cousins, come on down. We'll send Atlanta a 5th-round pick. Kirk will be our 1-year starter. And then with the additional draft capital from the Jaguars, we'll be in a really good spot where even if Kirk Cousins kind of overperforms for us and we don't have like a top 3 pick in the 2026 draft, because we have this extra capital now, that gives us the ability to move up for our long-term future franchise quarterback. And so I think that would be like a solid offer, but at the same time, even if it does make sense from the Browns' timeline in terms of like wanting to prioritize a future quarterback, it would be really hard for them to give up Travis Hunter. I kind of think that they're just going to be stand pat at 2 unless they get like what people would call a Godfather offer, which would be like 3 consecutive first-round picks, maybe a draft day Kevin Costner kind of offer. And so, yeah, I really wanted to come on here and just straight up predict that Travis Hunter will be a Jaguar. And to answer,
it would be amazing. It would be great.
To answer your question, I certainly think the Jaguars are trying to make it happen. But at the end of the day, I think the price is just going to be too high, especially for, as I was saying, like a team that's kind of in a soft rebuild. You don't want to give up too much future assets when you still are building not just like the top of the depth chart, but the bottom of the depth chart, and really trying to round out the whole 53-man unit. And so, yeah, I would love to see it happen. I think they would love to see it happen. I don't actually expect for it to happen.
Okay, so Scotty Tremaine in the comments, comparing Travis Hunter to one of the greatest baseball players of our generation is definitely wild. Gus isn't the only one doing that. The general manager of the Cleveland Browns did that last week.
Right.
so that's where I'm here to tell you that if that is how the Browns view Travis Hunter, there is no price point in my estimation that they will come off the pick. Maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to be wrong, especially considering that Travis Hunter is from not that far down the road in southwest Georgia. And wouldn't that be a nice little homecoming to bring him back to an area where he grew up? And let's be real, Knowles fans that are out there in the comments, you were spurred once by the kid. Would it be nice for you Knowles Jags fans to get a little second bite of the apple after all, when all is said and done? I agree. Like, I just don't see it happening, but I had to put him on the list because he is the number 1 player on their board. I can confidently tell you that. He is the number 1 player on the Jaguars board. I'm sure he's the number 1 player on most of the 32 teams' boards, with all due respect to Abdul Carter. And so that is where it's tough, because if this was any other player who's the number 1 overall player in the class, you know, maybe you have a concession of, well, I don't know. I don't want to give up that many dart throws. But this is a player who would fill 2 needs. So you give up this year's first. But let's say you were going to draft a wide receiver anyways, like you were going to draft Ted McMillan. You give up next year's first. Well, let's say you were going to draft a corner anyways next year. Well, you have now potentially filled that with 1 player. It's a massive, massive roll of the dice. I can also tell you that Travis Hunter would work well, from what I've been told, with Anthony Campanella and the Jaguars' plans defensively. And that is where, and I promise we're going to get to Ashton Genty and those offensive players at some point, but that's where I think we do need to have the Jalen Walker conversation, especially, yes, I see Robert in the comments noting about some bombs being dropped on the timeline about the potential trade back with the Bears to number 10. If the Jaguars were to trade back to number 10, not only do I think if Mason Graham is there, he could potentially be in play. I don't believe Jalen Walker will be there, but with all the smoke about Walter Nolan of Ole Miss potentially sneaking into the top 10, Michael Williams, Walker's teammate at the University of Georgia, potentially sneaking into the top 10, I'm going to throw the Jalen Walker argument out there, because if he's there at 10, I don't know if he perfectly fits into Anthony Campanella's defense, akin to what I've been told about Travis Hunter. But what I can tell you is that he would, in a situation in which the Jaguars do not have a third edge rusher behind Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, in which Devin Lloyd and Chad Muma, as of this writing, are in contract years, and Foye Oluokun, love our basketball analyst at 1010XL, but he is 29. I'm 32, so I could say that. And so technically in football years, you have to start planning for who else is coming up behind him. And certainly Ventrell Miller is a name that they like in the building, but he's 1 player. And so that's where I introduce the Jalen Walker conversation. And I also look at it from the lens of the Travis Hunter conversation. Is this a player where you have a plan? I have said that for weeks on this podcast. I've said it for weeks on 1010XL. This idea of, if you're going to draft Travis Hunter, if you're going to draft Jalen Walker, if you're going to draft Ashton Genty, you have to have a plan for these players, because they're good football players, but they have such a varied skill set. It's not like they are necessarily plug and play. And that's where you look at Mason Graham and you can make the argument, highest floor, you just throw him out there and he does what he did in college.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Liam Cohen at the NFL owners meeting was asked about Travis Hunter, and he said that as an organization, you just have to be fluid. And you kind of just continue to harp on that point. But like, just trying to say, I think that you got to be able to, I don't know, find a common ground with a player to do like what the player wants to do, but also to do what's best by the player. So, yeah, you certainly need to have a plan. I'm sure the majority of teams, at least picking in the top 5, have a plan for what they might do with Travis Hunter. The plan for Jalen Walker would certainly be interesting. I think that even if it seems like the Jaguars have 2 starting defensive ends and 2 starting middle linebackers or inside linebackers, then people might think, like, where is he going to fit in? Where is he going to get snaps? But there's plenty of attrition at every position across the league. And I think that he can play at so many different roles. Like, that's really what his value is, at least on the field, but really more so off the field. Like, he's definitely fits the intangibly rich mold, probably maybe more than any other prospect. I think Travis Hunter certainly fits that.
I was going to say, in terms of intangibly rich, Gus, those are the two guys, independent of the Jaguars, by the way, just what I've heard from teams, scouts, executives. If, as James Gladstone says, my definition of intangibly rich is what you're thinking. And what I'm thinking intangibly rich is, those are the 2 guys, in my opinion. And again, I think the Jalen Walker, the reason maybe he's not as high up the board is just because we don't know what he is on the field. And you would have to make that decision of how you are going to train him.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see where Walker goes. I've kind of been like starting to believe that his floor is the 8th overall pick to the Panthers. Of course, maybe the Panthers trade out of that because I think they would be interested in trading back if anyone wants to come up, especially for a defensive lineman. But yeah, I'm certainly expecting Jalen Walker to go at some point in the top 10, even if number 5 overall seems a little bit rich. But I think, I mean, this is a name that I've been kind of harping on as a sleeper pick for the Jaguars for, it feels like a couple months now. And so I would certainly say that with less than 12 hours to go, should be a name that we continue to watch.
All right. Is it time to have the conversation about those offensive players that I've just been, I keep pushing it back, but I think it's the time.
So we got, like, we talked about Travis Hunter and like how Abdul Carter is going to be at the pick. Those are like 2 defensive players if you consider Hunter a cornerback in any regard. And then Jalen Walker, we talked about. Mason Graham, we've talked about. So those are like there's no other defensive players on your list. I just want to make sure, right?
Yes.
Yep. There's no other defensive players.
I've got 3 right now. If we're going to count Travis Hunter as defensive, obviously the Browns view him, I think, as a wide receiver first, but independent of that, right. Yes, I have the 3, Walker, Graham, and Hunter, but then I have the 3 offensive players. And I saw in the comments someone asked about Will Campbell as well. Fine, we'll throw him in too. If the Patriots aren't to take him, even though we had Mike Giardi, who's as plugged in as anybody in New England on Helmets and Heels yesterday, and he agreed with me, and he said like tenfold that he thinks Will Campbell is going to move into Mike Vrabel's house next week, unless the Patriots were to trade out of number 4.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an option. I've seen a little bit of rumors. I don't think they're actually like true reporting. They're probably more so just rumors that the Patriots might trade for Raiders left tackle Colton Miller, which would solve at least their short-term problem at left tackle, and that would allow them to take Ashton Genty if he is the top overall player on their board at 4th overall. And so I think that there are some avenues to Will Campbell falling to 5th overall. Maybe even, yeah, as you said, like the Patriots could just trade out. Maybe someone trades up for Genty at 4th. So again, there's some avenues where Will Campbell becomes a Jaguar, specifically at 5th overall. But probably.
But also, Gus, don't forget, like, I don't want to bury the lead. Like we discussed, and in case you guys missed it on last week's episode that Gus and I did together, Will Campbell, Mason Graham, Spider-Man meme. Both have short arms. Both have been the best players at their respective positions since they became starters as true freshmen 3 years ago. And both have been criticized throughout the pre-draft process because they aren't home run top 5 picks, even if they both have 2 of the highest floors in this year's class.
Yeah, there's just like for both of them some athletic limitations that might cap them from becoming like truly like a top 5 type of player at their position. And so then you wonder like if it's worth spending very high-end draft capital on like just a very good player rather than a very high-end player. And so I feel like that's where that conversation goes. But so with the defensive players, we've hit those. We talked about Will Campbell. Who's the next offensive player you want to talk about?
Yeah, great segue, Gus. When you talk about the idea of Graham and Campbell they're maybe not top 5 talent. They're not blue chip talent. They're good players. And in this class, maybe you have to reframe your thinking that way of we just need good players. I don't care where we're picking them. But that's the argument for Ashton Genty. If Ashton Genty is there at 5, if he is the 3rd or 4th player on your big board, if you like, certainly Bucky Brooks has said it, certainly Daniel Jeremiah has said it. I know some folks have anywhere between 3 to 5 or 6 blue chip players in this class. Carter and Hunter are universal. Those two are blue chip players. They are blue dot players in the scouting world. Ashton Genty is the 3rd player that I believe most teams have that blue dot designation on. And so if you're the Jags, that's the argument. Independent of position, he's the highest rated player on our board. And yes, there have been positive returns from the Miller Electric Center in terms of their interviews with Ashton Genty. And I think that you could, and I forget which national outlet reported it last night, Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter, and then Emeka Egbuka is 3rd, were probably the 3 most, and Jalen Walker too. Those are like the 4 most universally beloved prospects on every interview they did during the pre-draft process. And so that's the thing. If he checks all the boxes, if he's the highest rated player, you have to take him. That is, in the words of Trent Baalke, trusting the board and following the board. I don't know if that's how James Gladstone's going to operate. I don't know. Let's trust the board. Like we've come full circle. And God, if he was still the GM, we're not even going to do that hypothetical of who the Jaguars would be taking. It would be Mykal Williams or Jalen Walker. But point being, this idea of if you believe in your scouting process and if you believe in statistically how you have put this call sheet together, if you're James Gladstone, because that's how he's going to operate tonight, just like Les Snead does in LA. If he's the highest guy on the board, then that's the argument. Then we're following our process, and this is what the process is telling us to do.
Yeah, to reiterate your point, like Genty, I think, is in a similar mold as Travis Hunter, where they're both superstars on the field, but off the field as well. Like in terms of like everything that we've seen and heard from like their character to their like toughness to like everything that the Jaguars and the majority of teams obviously are looking for in terms of football character and football leaders and locker room leaders, everything like that. Genty certainly fits that mold. And so I think that for that reason, as well as his talent on the field, he would certainly be very high up on the majority of boards, including Jacksonville. I feel like the argument is basically like short-term versus long-term, because with Hunter and Abdul Carter off the board, there's not going to be any player in this draft that helps his 2025 team or helps his team in 2025 during his rookie year more than Ashton Genty does. Of course, like there is the caveat of like maybe he doesn't go to a great scheme fit or like with somewhere that's not a great, doesn't have a great offensive line or just a poor offense in general that doesn't put a lot of points on the board. But like as long as you're doing your job as a team to like help make a good environment for him, like again, he's going to be, I think, the most productive or at least the most effective player in this class, bar Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. But then you have to consider like the long-term implications, especially when it comes to positional value and how running backs typically kind of fall off the shelf as early as before their rookie contract ends. And so certainly we've seen like Saquon Barkley have success in his second contract. Derrick Henry is still balling, and even though he's, I assume, over 30 years old, Bijan Robinson seems like a guy who's going to be continuing to play fantastically through his second contract. And so like Genty is certainly in that tier of like just special guys who like you aren't necessarily worried about him just like turning into dust in 3 years, but I don't like still. And then you, like it's just like the question or that I keep coming back to is like the timeline fit. Where like even if you think that Genty would help out Trevor Lawrence in the offense as a whole a ton, I would argue that like a tight end even or a wide receiver or offensive line would be more beneficial. But in terms of like just the timeline of the team, where they're at, again, I don't think they're going to be like trying to contend for a Super Bowl in 2025. And so I think it makes a lot more sense for Genty to go to, I guess even the Bears would be a better fit because I don't think they're Super Bowl contenders, but I think they are probably a little bit closer in 2025 than the Jaguars are.
The infrastructure is there, I think. The bones, if you may. And there's bones in Jacksonville, to be clear. I don't want you all to think, oh, the Jags aren't competing or anything like that, because they are. Their plan is to be competitive. in 2025. And certainly the division is a big part of that and the state of the division, but also because I think they believe in the pillars that they have here. But to your point, yes, Gus, I would agree, because that's a Bears defense, especially with the second contracts that they've handed out this offseason, that has guys in place for the next 2 to 3 years that are also homegrown. And that's where the Jaguars want to be in, let's say, a year or two. And they certainly have a couple pieces like that with Josh Hines-Allen and Tyson Campbell. But yes, I would agree with that sentiment. Okay, for the sake of time, let's keep it going with the next two players. So again, the argument for Ashton Genty is if he's the best rated player on your board at that juncture. The argument for Mason Graham, he fills a need. You didn't sign any defensive tackles in free agency. You said you wanted to get the rookies out on the grass early. He's there. Just take him. Travis Hunter, the argument is he's the best player in the class. If you can get him, it's certainly something you'd have to give up capital, but he's there. Jalen Walker, perhaps the second most intangibly rich player in the class. And if he's there, if you trade back and he's there, can you find a way to work with it?
Definitely another player too, in terms of, even if he is like a little bit hard to project in terms of like what's he going to do, especially for like this situation versus that situation. Like if it works out, Jalen Walker is the type of guy that every single defense coordinator wants on the team, even like the ones that are a little bit more conservative or a little bit like just less creative. Like everyone would want a Jalen Walker at his peak. And so, yeah, but
because he'll be a captain by like year 3.
Right. All right. So you got 2 more names, right?
Yes, I have Tet McMillan. I have Kelvin Banks, the 2 David Mulligetta clients who have suddenly come out of the woodwork. Okay, so Tet, let me go back with Tet. So a couple weeks ago, I heard some noise about, hey, the Jaguars do really like Tet, but ultimately ran 4.5. This idea of he is a volleyball player, Gus, and they talked about this on the Move the Sticks podcast about 2-3 weeks ago. Half of the teams in the NFL hear you're a volleyball player and they go, oh, that means he's lackadaisical. That means he's finesse. Not for us. The other half of the league hears volleyball player and they go, oh my goodness. Like that means his cardio is crazy. That means he's got jumps for days. He's a physical specimen. He's strategic in his mind. Like, so it's so interesting. I never would have thought that the phrase volleyball player would be as polarizing as it is. Yeah. So again, 2-3 weeks ago, hear the noise of like, well, he ran a 4.5. Yeah. Liam Cohen at the podium last week notes that the top of the wide receiver class is not that sparkling. And so that is where, for me, and I don't think that they care about optics at the MAC. They care about winning games. But ultimately, I just can't see a world in which he makes those comments last week and then the Jaguars turn around and they're the first team to select a wide receiver off the board tonight. Like I don't see that, because the optics of it would be poor, especially considering, and again, I don't give a crap. And I know everybody in the comments would echo this listening live right now. I don't give a crap what crazy vlogger in Tampa is saying about Liam Cohen, someone who I have stumped for to be the head coach of the Jaguars since December. But there would be people around the league who would be like, wow, he said one thing last week and then they did another thing the next week. I don't know if I want to trust that guy. And again, I trust Liam Cohen, but that would be the perception for some. Yeah, and that is where I think that would be malpractice. And ultimately, like, I like Tet. And I think if you trade back to, let's say, 20 with the Broncos, maybe then you entertain the prospect of it. But at 5 or 10, just a little bit too rich for me, especially knowing, as we found out earlier this week on Helmets and Heels, when Pat Bryant of Atlantic Coast High School Acclaim joined us, they've been doing their homework on some of these bigger wide receivers in the later rounds.
I almost feel like they might have Egbuka rated higher than Tet McMillan.
Yeah, I think I do. I think they do too.
So like if they trade back to 20,
I don't have that on the record, by the way. I don't have like that. I know that they are very high on Emeka Egbuka, but I also know I'm
just throwing out takes. I think that if I certainly don't think the Broncos are actually going to trade up from 20 to 5 to take Genty. But if they do, that would be like the perfect area to draft Egbuka. And I would not be surprised if they even drafted Egbuka over Tet McMillan, assuming that McMillan makes it to the 20th overall pick. Because I think that Egbuka is just such a clean fit in the offense for Liam Cohen's scheme to play alongside Trevor Lawrence, or to play alongside Brian Thomas, and then to be a reliable target for Trevor Lawrence. Like Tet, I think that the like character concerns are overblown. I wouldn't even call them concerns, but like there was like 2 years ago, he went on a podcast and said that like he doesn't really watch any film. and that I'm sure he loves football, but like maybe not loves football the way that other prospects in this class like. To me, that's not a red flag, but it's just like it's not a green flag either. And so I think the Jaguars are definitely going to be wanting to take a guy who's clearly like has a green flag for his character, because Gladstone has, like, as many times as he's talked about intangibly rich this offseason, like he's also harped on like they're gonna follow through with it, and it's going to be like something that you can see with their actions and not just their words. And so I think that with the first pick in this new regime, with especially if it's a fifth pick and they hopefully won't be picking in the top 5 for a while, I think they're just like want to make a statement in terms of like not just the player that they get, but in terms of the person that they get. And I think that Ted McMillan would be a really good pick. I feel like just like for the argument of just helping Trevor Lawrence, like if you have Brian Thomas and Ted McMillan, then like that helps out Trevor Lawrence for the long term. And like you don't really have to worry too much about wide receiver anymore. But honestly, like similar to the way that Ashton Genty would like objectively help the Jaguars, I don't know if it would be like the best allocation of resources. And I almost feel like that way with Tet, where like not every single team in the NFL has like field tilting wide receiver that like demands coverage. Like for the most part, good teams like are able to build a wide receiver room that's kind of cohesive and that's like 3 or 4 people deep and that like all have different roles and make a lot of sense together. And so the Jaguars like already have a luxury of having Brian Thomas, of having a field tilter, of having a guy that defenses have to know where he is every snap. And so I think that while Tet would like make sense because like, yeah, it helps Trevor Lawrence, like they don't need to put that much resources into the receiver room when they already have Brian Thomas. And so I think that Egbuka, especially at like the 20th range or like the bottom of the first, the top of the second, whatever, that makes sense. But yeah, I think that's for a couple of reasons, but especially the one that you pointed out with Liam Cummins' comments from last week. I just would be surprised if he was a Jaguar, even if the Jaguars trade back to like 10th overall and he's still there.
One more note, and gosh, Robert, you stole my thunder. Come on, dog. Listen, he's a loyal 1010XL listener. We appreciate
Yeah, we
Robert.
love
He's a heel again. Yes, that was the final point I was going to make. Jedd Fisch, the head coach at Washington, the former head coach at Arizona, who recruited Ted McMillan, has been stumping for him like crazy. And Jedd Fisch was on staff in Los Angeles when Liam Cohen first came to the Rams and the National Football League almost a decade ago. And James Gladstone, of course, was on staff there. And so, yes, there is the Jedd Fisch of it all. And that can be filed away too. And so, look, again, for me, I agree with you, Gus. I think it's more so looking like a hypocrite. That's the part that like, I have concerns like with that regards. Like I don't want this to turn into, well, he's a liar. And you know that will be put on blast. For the sake of time, let's pivot to the final name on this list, the other David Mulugeta client. Love you, David. Love Athletes First. Love our friends at Athletes First. But at this point, it's a great bit. Listen, I'm the same one who's out here pushing the Jarian Jones, Jalen Ramsey conversation. So we love Athletes First here at Duval Rundown and 1010XL. Kelvin Banks, literally don't know where it came from outside of through the agent grapevine. Good player. Has certainly over the last 3-4 weeks, there's been a lot of smoke from Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Todd McShay, this idea of maybe teams have Banks higher on their draft board than Armand Membu, maybe higher than Will Campbell. But the fact that the Jaguars not only signed 4 offensive linemen, Gus, they signed 2 tackles who I know, yes, one has guard tackle versatility in Chuma Idoga. And then, of course, Patrick McCarry is expected to be the starting right guard, but he also has tackle versatility.
True.
I don't see a world in which the Jaguars would place a premium on a tackle, which is why Banks would make sense of that entire pot of offensive linemen, especially if you traded back to 10. Yeah, I know. Charlie Campbell also thinks the Jags are taking Kenneth Grant, which I would love, by the way, if they get him at 36. Thank you, Hef, in the comments. But Banks would make the most sense because outside of Will Campbell, he probably has the most inside-outside versatility. And you make the argument of either you're going to trade Ezra Cleveland because he's not a scheme fit, or Ezra's only here for 1 more year, and then Banks will become the left guard. And this is a big year for Anton Harrison in the third year of his 4-year rookie contract, unless you pick up the 5th-year option. Walker Little, yes, is on the first year of a 3-year deal, depending on guaranteed money. He's probably here for 2 more years. So you could make the argument, well, Banks is going to start at left guard and then maybe in 4 years kick out to tackle when Little becomes too expensive because he balls out. I don't know. Like, if you want to go that route and you want to make the argument, and this is the argument because that's the point of today's podcast. If your argument is we raise the floor with the free agent signings, it's time to raise the ceiling and the potential of what Kelvin Banks could be, I respect that. But looking at James Gladstone's track record in LA, they operated under we want guys who we can plug and play right away.
Yeah, I think the argument for Banks as well as Campbell over Membu especially, and even Josh Simmons, if you aren't worried about his medicals, is what you just outlined, where it's like the versatility. And I think that maybe I feel like I've been overthinking it, so maybe the Jaguars are overthinking it a little bit with Membu, especially since I think he certainly could play inside, even if he would be maximized outside at tackle. But yeah, that's the thing, is that like I think immediately, whether it's Campbell or Banks, if that were the pick, then they would potentially be the week, maybe not week one, but immediately at least compete with Ezra Cleveland for the starting job at left guard. And then you have that versatility where, like, if say Walker Little goes down with an ankle sprain, then like you've got Banks or Campbell that can kick out to tackle. You can move around Akari. You can move around a couple of different pieces. And I think that's really what they want, especially when it comes to the attrition at the position and how like there's not going to be a single team in the league this year that has their starting 5 offensive linemen start and finish all 17 games. That just does not happen. And so even if the Jaguars' starting lineup seems like it's kind of set in stone right now, and even if they did add depth in the offseason, especially to tackle, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if they address the offensive line as early as their first-round pick, especially considering like Liam Cohen has talked like actually John Spytek spoke a few weeks ago about how like Cohen was telling him about like, wow, when I got here as into Jacksonville, I didn't realize how good our offensive line in Tampa Bay was. You really need to invest. The Rams have been investing a lot in their offensive line in recent years. Tony Baselli, obviously the first overall pick in franchise history, like 30 years and 2 days ago to the day. And then helping out Trevor Lawrence and wanting to set the dish, as Gladstone said at the NFL Combine. There's a lot of reasons I think that the Jaguars could go with their favorite offensive line prospect in the first round, even if it doesn't seem like they might start right away.
Let's just end with this because I want to just crush my dreams publicly on the internet for everyone. We were watching, which I do want to give a shout out before we go. And of course, we're going to have you guys locked and loaded on all the 1010XL channels all day long with draft coverage and all weekend long for that matter. But I do want to give a shout out to PanCam Pictures, the production group that did the amazing 3-part series behind the scenes of the Senior Bowl. I got a chance to watch the first 2 episodes last night. It is quite frankly better than Hard Knocks in terms of access. You should go watch it today if you have time ahead of the draft starting before our coverage starts, because quite frankly, it is going to give you a different perspective of a lot of these prospects. And Gray Zabel pops on the screen, and Gus, I just look at Kevin, knowing that I went on BetMGM earlier this week with our friend Feme, and I said, I was like, if the Jags trade back to 20 or 21 or 22 or something crazy like that, like, I'd take Gray Zabel. I don't think he's going to be there. I think he's gone by 18, but I would take him because he sets the dish and he fits the identity and he has 5 position versatility. And I said to Kevin last night, I just want us to take Gray Zabel. And he was like, no, it's dead. Like, just get it out. Like, it's not happening. Quit asking. Nick Saban meme. And I don't know. Because
what, 10? If they trade back?
I would.
Probably not.
I would, honestly. Like, again, I'm just very high on the prospect. I know there's a lot of folks, and I don't know if this is true at the Miller Electric Center. I know it's definitely true in Houston, by the way. There's folks who have Donovan Jackson and Tyler Booker higher than Gray Zabel on their big board in the interior. I just come back to, and this goes for all of these names we've thrown out there today as we've emptied the notebook, this idea of, with the Rams, James Gladstone didn't pick players who were projections. He picked players who you could throw on the field at their natural position right away, and they made an impact. And so when we look at Jalen Walker, when we look at Kelvin Banks, and this idea of, yes, their overall talent profile would elevate your team, but could you throw them right away into one position and they thrive because that's where they've played for X amount of years leading into it? That's the tough part for me. And that's why I've come back to Mason Graham. And it's why I look at the Travis Hunter possibility, even if it's a 1% chance. It's why I look at Ashton Genty and I say, you know what? That at the very least, you would know what they are. And that is historically how the Rams have operated.
Well, I think that kind of answers my question for you, because the last thing I wanted to hit on before we get out of here is that we did not mention a tight end in those names that you.
Oh yeah, which by the way means that they're picking Tyler Warren at 10. Yeah, just throw that one out there.
I do think that, like, even if they're infatuated with Tyler Warren, which I don't necessarily know that they are, like, they kind of have 3 tight ends right now who can play right away. Even if, like, especially Hunter Long and Johnny Munt, like, don't seem overly exciting, they can play right away in week 1 through the entire season. And so, again, like Liam Cohen's Buccaneers last year did carry 4 tight ends. So I wouldn't completely discount a tight end, but I think it's much more likely that it's like a developmental day 3 kind of guy, maybe a day 2 guy, who would, like, probably not play right away, as opposed to getting a Tyler Warren or like a Colson Loveland. I would love to say that, like, Loveland is like my sleeper pick for the Jaguars. I think that his, like, profile makes a lot of sense for them, other than the fact that he's plays tight end, and, like, they have 3 tight ends that they like, and so maybe they'll add one, but they don't really feel like they have to add one. And so I think they'll look to another position. But yeah, I wouldn't be mad at Warren or Loveland or trading a 5th round pick for Dallas Goedert.
Ooh, that's a sneaky one right there. The reason I grabbed my phone, I don't have any scoops for y'all, but my good friend, the other Kevin, not the one that I'm dating and live with, Kevin Glick, one of my best friends from Iowa, who hopefully is I hope they're at the hospital right now welcoming their first child, knock on wood, for Erin's sake. He placed a plus 3,500 bet. He's a Bears fan, for Loveland to go 10th overall. And so I don't know when he placed that bet, but that was plus 3,500 for Loveland at 10. So just file that one away if that's what you would love to see happen.
Yeah, I'm a big Loveland fan, even if I don't think he makes a lot of fit for the Jaguars, or at least their timeline. I'm excited to see where he goes. But that'll do it for today's episode. We will be back in the short future. Programming to cover the NFL draft begins at 11 a.m. Is that correct, Mia? We will have.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll run through it, Gus. So for those of you who are headed out to the Lemon Bar for the Jaguars draft party, the doors open at 6, but our live coverage on 1010XL across all of our daily programming will start at noon. So with Helmets and Heels, Dan Hicken will be at the Lemon Bar. If you want to go hang out with Dan and be on 1010's video camera, hop on over there to the Lemon Bar. So we will have a presence starting at noon. That'll be your standard, typical daily programming, 12 until 7, because we do have from 4 to 7 p.m. on 92.5 FM and 1010 AM and everywhere you can get 1010. We have the ultimate mashup. Hayes Carlion, Hacker, and Rick Ballou for the ultimate pregame extravaganza to your NFL draft watching experience. And so, yeah, so that's from 4 to 7. I'll be at the Lemon Bar during that time for a couple of live hits. Then I'll be at the Miller Electric Center later in that program. ET will be at the Lemon Bar. He will have a live interview with one Brian Thomas Jr. So yeah, we've got you covered. And then starting at 7 p.m., make sure you come back here to our YouTube channel, because that's where from 7 to 10 p.m., if you guys are familiar at all with any side-by-side draft watch party, if you watch MMA fighting, if you're a UFC fan, that's kind of the inspiration for this. Gus will be here leading the ship. Hacker, Coach Campo. I'll be live at the Mech with Hayes. ET will be at Lemon Bar. We will have you covered from all angles from 7 to 10 p.m. And, you know, if the Jags decide to trade back in or just not make a pick till after 10 o'clock, Gus and I will be right back here for some emergency podcasts.
That's right. Really looking forward to it. Again, 7 to 10, really starting at noon. You can catch all of our draft content throughout 1010XL's programming and social media channels. But specifically for Duval Rundown, I will see all of you back here at 7 p.m. Eastern sharp as we break down the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft. Mia, thanks as always. It's been a journey, but we got here.
We're ready, and we're going to come out swinging.
All right, thanks to all of our.
We're going to be bold, Gus. Actually, let me take that back. I want that to be the final line. Okay. We are going to be bold. We are not going to flinch.
We're not going to flinch. I love that. All right, thanks, everyone. See you at 7.